Welcome everyone to our weekly webinar here from AUT in Auckland. And this week we're really sort of a pre-MOSOMELT CMOOC, and we have a special guest today who's going to be presenting on how they use mobile applications, particularly in paramedicine. So with us we have all the way, I think actually from Christchurch, Brendan Wood, who's a senior lecturer at AUT.
Hi Tom, it's great to be here this morning.
Yeah, great to have Brendan on board, and we're going to hand over to Brendan in a minute. We'll just introduce the rest of the people who are here as well. We've got Lisa.
Hi everyone, I'm at AUT, I'm in the Learning Technologies team, and I work with Tom.
We also have Noelle. I think Noelle's got a microphone off, but Noelle is also part of that team. And we also have, joining us all the way from Japan, we have Neil.
Good morning, everybody.
So Neil was part of our CMOOC, and basically we're sort of getting the band back together, really, aren't we, Neil? The usual team of suspects discussing on a Friday, Research Friday, how we're using technology in education. So great for anyone who's watching us live or who may be watching this later. And now we'd like to hand over to Brendan, who's going to talk us through how he uses mobile apps, particularly in critical care, health, and some of the cool things that he does, and how that's integrated into, I guess, patient care and his practice and education as well. So thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, Tom. I've got to get the branding right first. So I'm with the Department of Paramedicine, which is based in our South Auckland campus, but I work in Christchurch predominantly with a group of paramedics who live and work in the South Island. So my role is to support their learning. So our department has members of or student body from one end of the country to the other. So we love using a bit of technology. And this is my first time using this particular platform. So I'm quite excited just to find out how it goes and how this might be applicable to me as well. So a little bit about myself. I joined the AUT team in 2014, and that was prior to that I had a career as an intensive care paramedic and also military medic. So I specialize a little bit in the difference between civilian medicine and military medicine, because there are some specific cohorts that require some specific management. I teach clinical reasoning. So I teach about how paramedics understand the modalities that they use and what applications as far as clinical applications they can use and how that alters their practice. And so, and it's interesting, Tom, your kind introduction, I highlighted that I live in Christchurch, and of course Christchurch now has a pretty dubious reputation for, first of all, earthquakes, and second, recent tragic events on the 15th of March with terror. So it highlighted to me about the need to understand some things around how can we make the community engage. I'm just going to share a couple of PowerPoint slides. I just hope this is the first time I'm going to share an application, so I hope this works okay. So I recently presented a paper at a conference in Wellington, and that's the one I want to share. So here is the first slide. Hopefully.
Yep, there we go. That's cool.
Good. So the thing about this was a conference in Wellington that was about first aiders, teaching first aiders and how to make them go. And improving response and participation of first aiders was one of the things that I reviewed. And it was clear that for a lot of people, learning first aid is one thing, but how do you get people to take those skills and to actually apply them in the community once they have got the skills? So after the February 11th earthquakes, there was a big uptake in first aid training. And this is the face of Shane Tomlin, who died in the February earthquakes. But his picture was published very much alive there the next morning, and that was the first time his family had seen that he was still alive. But he subsequently died that day due to his injuries. But these two young guys that are sitting with him here are just they're construction workers, and one's a baker, and they've been there to do what they can, and that's pretty amazing that they stood with them. So that's a sort of the face of first aid response here in Christchurch. Subsequently, if you look at two other events, one of them, or the earthquakes, and then the Madrid bombings that occurred some time ago, 67% of the people reaching the hospital arrived in a non-ambulance vehicle. So that was members of the community picking them up. And in that bottom left picture you can see there, that's the Christchurch earthquake, where people just put people into utes and carried them on doors and bonnets and things like that to get them to hospital. And the same response occurred in London during the London bombings and terror attacks. So it's clear that volunteers play a big role in supporting emergency response. And so to do that, we have to change the paradigm of emergency response, and we need to have first aiders sort of prepare for that. And keep calm, there's an app for that, is where we're going to move on to look at some of the apps that we're going to use. And this paper looks at how we can use, first aiders can adapt the use of apps to support that. And so we're going to look at some apps, and I'm going to share my phone now, and we're going to talk about these apps. So I'm going to stop sharing that one. Oh no, that's opening Word. Hang on, that's not what we want. I'm using a Mac that's been sitting idle for some time, and it's interesting because that's what I want to do there. Share that, and but of course, when I got it all organised, it was a great effort to sort out the updates and things.
Oh, you're doing really well, Brendan.
Great. No, I'm clearly, EndNote wants to come on now, so I'm just going to get rid of all that. Stop sharing that, and I want to share an application. I think is the right term, Tom, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and you want to be sharing quick time. Yep.
Yeah. So application window, and that's oh God, what have we got here? Sorry, I've just hit the wrong button. I'll be with you in a moment.
That's all right.
The cat's not helping either. I haven't done the global introduction of Miss Poppy. Just while I'm organising myself, there are three groups of apps I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about general apps which can be downloaded and used in support of just general activities. I'm then going to look at apps which can support responders. And then I'm going to talk about the specific apps that we use in paramedicine. So hopefully you can see my screen there, can you?
Yeah, we've got your iPhone screen now. Awesome.
Great. Okay, thank you. Right. So I've got a bunch of things. Oh God, now EndNote wants to open because Word opens. Rule number one: try and avoid. Of course, you have to reorientate yourself back to a Mac. Anyway, back to me. So the first app that I want to talk about is one that was introduced to me, and this is another interesting thing. I'm showing 100% charged on the top of the phone and 86% lower down. So I don't know what the hell's going on with my charging at the moment, but never mind. Right. This app, Citizens Aid, is a very interesting app in that it was introduced to me in Singapore during a military conference, and it's very timely if you are traveling to consider this. And this is what you should do for those events. So such as we've had in Christchurch, an active shooter event, it highlights the things you need to do as an individual in a situation. So the first thing is turn your phone off and even turn the vibrate off. But then it talks about the three things that you should do: run, hide, and tell. And it goes through those three steps. The interesting thing about the app is that it has all sorts of things for vehicle accidents. So we'll just get rid of that. It's my partner ringing in. Burns, unattended items, first aid treatment as well. And also it provides, so it's very elaborate, and it also provides things like some triage steps and things like that. So it's not an app that you'd really want on your phone, but it's an app that if you needed it, it's very helpful. And the thing about it is that if we just go back to the active shooter scenario again, what it does is it does provide very simple steps. And the interesting thing here is it tells you to ring, and it's set up for 999. It's an English app, but it also says 112, and you might be interested to know that 112 is a global phone number for emergency services. Did anyone know that?
No.
What's the number in Japan?
119.
119. But 112 is global. If you ring 112 in New Zealand, you'll also get connected with the emergency services.
So
that's,
is this a free app, Brenda?
It's a free app. These are all free apps. And so this is
so anyone could go to the App Store and download these.
Download that, yep. And so I'll just come back to the front so you can just see what it looks like. It's a funny little app, and it's sort of a bit clumsy in the way it's set up, but it's really set up by people who have been involved in activities, and it sort of has a global application, and it says an American app as well, but that's the British app. So Citizen Aid is what that's called.
Found it and downloaded. Thanks.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Now the other one,
and hopefully you don't have to use it, Lisa.
And never use it.
Exactly.
That's
never use
guaranteed.
it, hopefully, because I won't have my phone.
If it's on your phone, then you won't need it.
Yeah.
The other little app, if you're not, I'm not going to use this app myself, but I think for anyone that's not a paramedic or something like that, this is the first aid, sort of the International Red Cross's commitment to providing some first aid material. So that's a little Red Cross app. That's also a free app, and so that's the first aid app on the top right there. And then the other app, which is for general use for first aiders, St John New Zealand provide this app. And it's for emergencies, for cardiac arrest emergencies. And the nice thing about it is that if we go through adult resuscitation, it just goes through the steps, check danger, and then response, call for help. And if you touch the 111 bar, it connects you, it makes your phone connect to the emergency services. Airway breathing, and then CPR, and the noise. Can you hear the noise in the background?
No, we can't.
So let me just check. So maybe that's let me just check for setup. Microphone. I can hear it in my headset, so I'm wondering what's happening there. But anyway, what that's doing is it's providing a metronome beat at 60 beats per minute. You can see obviously it's working there on the thing, but I'm sorry you haven't got audio with that. But what that does is provides the beat for the cardiac compressions, which is the most important thing in cardiac arrest, is to maintain that compression rate of 100 to 110. And so that's what that app is quite good at. And then it just talks through continuation. With that, it's also the app provides a summary of how to use a manual defibrillator. So again, this is not an app that I'm going to be using, but for a first aider, where is it? No. This app is the next one is the AED tutorial, and of course the opportunity to donate online. But the AED tutorial is very helpful too if you grab an advisory defibrillator, and then you can use that. So that's what we've done is the Citizens Aid, the First Aid, and the St John New Zealand app. Okay, so those are sort of the first aid apps.
Sorry, Brendan, just to interrupt. The first aid one and the hazards one, where are they actually based? Were they based in?
So under Red Cross. So you look in Red Cross.
Oh, Red Cross. Yep, got those.
Good.
But they're not New Zealand apps?
Yeah, they are.
They are.
So synchronized with that.
Yep.
So of those apps, the First Aid, the Citizen Aid, and the St John one are general response ones. Now, hazard notification is the next thing I just wanted to talk about. But coming from Christchurch, of course, we are deeply interested in everything that shakes. A wee bit like Japan, and you'll see here that the last earthquake was 2 hours ago, and it was north of Culverden. Now, it's kind of doesn't help responding or anything like that, but we found that during the time of the big earthquake season that we had here, it meant that responders could look at where the earthquake had occurred and think, right, that's a decent earthquake. Maybe as a first aid responder, that's where I should generally be heading towards that. To the point where we were getting so good at this, we could go to map and we could download the longitude and latitude of the earthquake and pop that into Google Maps and work out whose house it was under.
Right.
We were getting quite good at working out where the actual events were occurring. I'm not sure if you have anything like this in Japan, but that's the most recent earthquake, and we had one yesterday, and that was quite This one also means that you can talk about that you felt it and report that. Those are the quakes, and we can go list or maps. The list is quite good. Also, it does the volcanic alerts for the North Island, so for Ruapehu and White Island, and it gives updates on things like the Crater Lake, and it has a menu as well.
It certainly highlights the frequency of earthquakes in New Zealand, doesn't it?
Well, it really does. Yeah, good. So that's quite good. But the other one I really like is this one. This is the Red Cross's app on hazard notification. And a good example of how this works is I was out working on some woodwork and doing staining and things like that. And then my phone went off, and I picked it up, and it was the Red Cross app alerting me to a weather storm that was about to break in Christchurch. So I said, right, I better respond to that and put my woodworking away and cover everything up. And about 20 minutes later, bang, the weather came. So it's very attuned to, it's linked into the other weather systems. So even though I could be looking at my Met Service app, this app does the alerting as it's happening. So I think that's why I like the responsiveness of that particular app. And again, it gives hints on what to do for flooding and storms and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, so the key with that app would be when it first starts up that you tick the box that says allow notifications.
Absolutely. Now, I'm assuming that does a little bit more power out of your phone as well. But
yeah, it'll be running in the background a little bit.
They're running in the background. But so those are sort of my first responders apps. So the first aid apps, First Aid, St. John, and the Citizen AED, Citizen Aid. And then we've got the response maps. I suppose the other universal one is the AED map, and that shows you, that's my address in Rutland Street in St Albans, and then it shows that there's an AED across the road at the Rutland Street church office. It says when the hours are open. So this is for citizens to respond who have first aid training or something like that, but just shows you where the local AEDs are. And then as you go out, you can see that there is a great proliferation of automated defibrillators in the community. We know that.
What's the time frame for getting someone resus?
Well, we need to be defibrillating them within 8 minutes, but only about 6% of community cardiac arrests have someone jump on them with a defibrillator. So that has a direct outcome into the survival rates for cardiac arrest. So that AED app is pretty good. So if you so that's the AED, that's pretty universal. Now to take that the next step forward, this next app is called SmartSam, and now I'm a registered responder with SmartSam, and I'll just again zoom in here, and the dot is where I live, obviously, but it also has where the other responders are about in the neighbourhood at the moment. So what I want to do is simulate an alert. So what happens any time of the day and night, regardless of the status of my phone, whether it's turned silent or vibrate or no night notifications, this application comes in over the top of all those. And this alerts you as a responder. I practice as a paramedic with St. John. So as a responder, it will alert me based on the configuration of cell towers, probably to about 300 to 500 meters, when there's a cardiac arrest. And it gives me the option to accept and respond in the neighborhood to support the ambulance service with cardiac arrests. So what I can do is simulate an alert and create a fake alert. So this I'm going to accept that. This huge siren noise goes off in the background. Unfortunately, you couldn't hear that.
Yes, we could.
Yeah, we did.
You could. That was in my ear. And then so what I do then is I accept that I'm going to respond, and then what it does is it links me then, and that's where I'm here in the blue dot, and the patient is up here in the with the red, and then it says that the alert is 68 meters away, and then it asks me to hit my camera. And what it does is if you've got someone with a camera, you can pass your phone to them, and that live stream of the event occurs, and the ambulance communication center can see that based through the app.
So this app would then, you have to be a registered first responder
you have to register
to access this app?
That's right. You register with the app and they confirm you. And New Zealand has elected not to accept credentials. So you don't have to supply certification. So any first aider can be encouraged to download this app, because we decided that the population is so small in New Zealand, we kind of know how the network works. So as opposed to the UK, where I would put my practicing certificate online and they would accept that. In Singapore, of course, it's almost mandatory that everyone help anyone anyway. So they use a different platform. So that's what it does is it gives me the ability to live stream the event by holding my phone up, and I'll turn the camera, and then obviously it would show that. Then you can do a chat to the control room. It tells you that I've got a simulator and I've triggered it. It's got the map and that. So that's called SmartSam, and that's a global.
So presumably
app as well.
the video stream is for an expert to give you feedback on the event.
Absolutely, and in some jurisdictions, Tom, the infrared aspects of the phone camera is able to determine oxygenation of the patient.
Wow.
So there are some very clever features happening with the emergence of that app, for sure. So we've covered sort of first aid apps, responders apps, and now we're into the sort of slightly more technical apps, and that's the responder. And the last two apps I just want to talk about is this New Zealand Formulary. So this is just a link to the New Zealand Formulary. So for health practitioners, what we need is up-to-date information about drugs and medications that have been administered. So if we look at respiratory system, we can go for anaphylaxis or acute asthma. And that then links me to what the current treatment regimes are. And so this is updated 3 times a month. So really so I'd expect some of my students next week who come to the Aviva assessments, their oral assessments for their degree, if they want to look up something about what a patient medication is, they will use this app, and they will be able to get, 3 times a month it's updated. The versions are very, very apt, and and what I've done is downloaded that as a link, so it links to the live site each time. So that's the New Zealand Formula, and there's a special one for children. So that's a really useful app for clinicians. So just pause there before I go on to our last app. Does anyone have any questions about any of those specific apps?
So I was wondering about the link to, say, Wearable Technologies, Brendan, like, an Apple Watch. Obviously, maybe a lot of these apps would then have versions on the Apple Watch. Or,
yes, I think that's probably right. I went old school and got a Fossil watch because I didn't want any sort of watch that made it look as if I was interested in physical fitness. So, but I imagine that for the SAM's responder, I know that alerts my phone that the alert has gone off from my phone. So that's kind of how that links. But that's probably, for an old guy like me, it's probably the next level of integration. So the last app I wanted to share with you was the top right app, and this has actually received international commendations for its for the app, and it's received a number of significant sort of prizes in the app world. I'm not sure what they are, but generally, if you just talk about that. So this is the clinical app that I use for my clinical practice. If I'm an intensive care paramedic, a paramedic, or an EMT, I'll just stay on paramedic. I see. Who's there? Elise is there, so I say 60 kgs for Lisa. There we go.
Now you've been really generous.
Oh, thank you. So by putting the weight in to the patient, it then provides me with the various clinical aspects. So if I go for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, mild, moderate, severe, it provides me with my medications and my treatment options for each of those critical, what I need to do for those patients. For cardiac, the same. One of the things which is very good about it is that for cardiac arrest, it puts, and again, this is, you might be able to hear that beating in the background.
Yeah.
But also it flashes the light on the phone, and again, this is the metronome for chest compressions. Now, the interesting thing is the St. John First Aid app has the rate at 100 a minute, The rate has gone up now to optimum rate of 110 beats per minute. So it's been interesting. This app has been very agile and it's been able to change, but the other app hasn't quite caught up with that yet. The other thing which is really good about this is it provides the procedural checklists for things like cardioversion. If I have to cardiovert the patient, I can just go through and tick off the checklists and make sure that everything's correct in the way that I'm preparing a patient to cardiovert them. We'll just leave a gap, and it just shows you there that you know, as we go, yes, all done. So that's those checklists are excellent as well. And then there's a non-transport checklist if we're going to leave a patient at home. Specific one, so it's called a pause and a check, and then it provides you with some summary there. Now, if we go back to the beginning and pretend it's not Lisa, actually, no, I need to go right out of here. So I'll just quit the app and come back in again. And if we go 20 kgs, which gives me a pediatric patient, so the app then automatically diverts to the medical drug requirements for a child. So if I go to asthma 2.1, severe, it'll have an adrenaline rate 0.2 milligrams of adrenaline IM. So that is a specific rate for a 20 kg child. So this is a phenomenal app. I'm sure there's a lot of ambulance services around the world that now are talking to the developers of this particular app, because it's such a fantastic way to update things. It also has some phone contacts. So the top one is called the clinical desk. If I want to talk to someone about the clinical situation, I can contact the air desk if I want to request a helicopter. And then it also has some clinical updates and safety alerts and podcasts and clinical focus and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So it's a phenomenal app. It's been a very revolutionary app, but it doesn't preclude as yet the production of a paper-based app, a paper-based clinical procedure. But the app has more functionality to it than the paper-based one. So that's all my apps. I'll just stop sharing the screen for a moment so that I can join you again. And we're happy to have any further discussion about any of those particular applications.
Hey, well, thank you very much, Brendan. It's really interesting.
That was really, really interesting.
Oh, it's too kind.
So I guess my question would really be, what's the implication or the impact on paramedic education of these new technologies, these, you know, mobile applications? Is there a follow through into a change in how you interact with your students, or some of the digital literacies that are now required?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Tom. And that previously you sort of expected students to know everything. You can't do that. It's becoming far more complex. So this year it's interesting because the procedures are good for 2 years, and then they have to be renewed. That's under the Standing Orders Act of New Zealand. So, and what's happened is a 2019 set of changes which are due, but there's been a slight delay in producing them. So in fact, what's occurred is the app is up to date, but maybe the paper booklet now hasn't been produced yet. So there's a slight a rationale there that needs to be sorted out. But what it means is this is the first semester that will allow the students to use their app in the clinical assessments, because there's so much information that we wouldn't want them to retain. If you deal specifically with a pediatric patient, we actually want them to check a drug dose to make sure it's absolutely the right dose. So
it's actually changing your assessment approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is that. And of course, what you've got is, you know, we've got 300 students in the campus. And what we want them to do is be encouraged to participate in community events if they can respond and provide their novice expertise. That's better than having no expertise about. So for their first responder apps and things like that, you know, it's very applicable that they get into the habit of doing that.
So do you think the major change really is moving away from perhaps memory recall and teaching to much more critical evaluation and thinking?
Well, I think it's I think that is a case, but the thing is, it's our paramedic education staircase based on the level of practice that the individuals are doing. So it's becoming much more complicated as far as the medications that paramedics can use. The complex nature and dynamic nature of healthcare is changing. And so this is where technology can support both the learning and the practice.
And be much more up to date, I suppose, and more reactive.
Well, I suppose was it Sun Sin, as we train, so shall we fight. So if we use the same analogy, we can say as we train our paramedics to practice in the field, then that's how they will practice in reality. So
Sure.
That's that learning that we support. So I think it's constructive alignment in our program is really important, and that then sort of says you start off with basic life support and then intermediate life support, and so that's very important to be able to take and change and modify that quickly, because as you know, anyone even that's a community first aider, how quickly CPR changes over the years every time there's a new set of rules around that. So
Yeah. Well, any other questions from anyone else?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan, for that. That was a wonderful introduction to those apps. I really want to find out if there are similar ones in Japan, particularly for the earthquakes. I was just wondering if there's much resistance in your field to using those apps.
Well, I think it's transitional. As phones become more sophisticated, it became easier to adopt them. The St. John CPG app's not an open app. You have to log in and get it through the organisation, because you have to be a clinician to be able to use that. And so, but what we do is have a license for our students to be able to download that during their clinical placements. So that's supported that. So I think, yes, so for older practitioners, even myself, I'm still very comfortable using a paper copy. But it's interesting, actually, an observation, when students have used to using the app and they go back to a paper copy, they forget the basic thing of looking at the index to find the page they need, and they spend the next few minutes opening the pages and swapping around instead of having a look. Miss Poppy's come back to join us again, everyone. So there has to be a few moments for cat lovers. But yeah, so they forget to go. But one of the questions I might put to you is there a culture of responding to help in Japan? Is that if someone has a cardiac arrest in the street, do people just stand around and watch, or do people get involved?
Oh, that's a tough question. I would like to say yes, that people do get involved, but I honestly don't know whether that is the case. I mean, I've never been in a situation where I've had to observe that going on, and then when you see things on the television elsewhere, then there is a lot of involvement, but it might have come after some delay.
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah,
having spent time in Japan, there's that sort of level of social sort of reticence to be. I'm just not sure how that works with responders, but
yeah, I think that's a really important aspect, because I think it's the social cultural dynamics around not just responding to critical care, but of technology use, and in particular smartphones, that I think is radically changed, because now everyone has a smartphone and they're on they're on it all day long. So
right.
Whether that's trickling down into the educational environment's another thing, though, isn't it? Yeah.
If I go back to my opening remarks, Tom, the evidence that I read was that you can teach someone first aid, but unless you give them the opportunity to be linked into support or to help, they'll learn first aid, but they won't do that. So this is where I think the link is by providing. So if you're teaching first aid, the other thing you should be doing is, and by the way, you should have these apps. You should make that link so that it's easy for people to be able to use the apps to help them provide.
So it gives them that sense of support to be able to actually go and do something. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Good.
Hey, we're kind of a little bit over time, which is fine because it's been fantastic. But we should probably stop the broadcast here.
Great.
So thank you very much to Brendan, our guest presenter all the way down in Christchurch today. It's been really, really interesting. It's been really cool to see the application of particularly mobile technology within a very practice-based discipline like paramedicine. And thanks to all our discussants who have joined us live today. So thank you.
That was amazing, Brendan.
Thank you all. Very kind. Cheers. We'll see you again soon.